It's a very warm welcome to Africa 360. We're the program that goes right across the continent to bring you news and views that you won't get anywhere else. And those views, of course, are with a distinctly African perspective. I'm Chris Marilang, and you are watching Africa 360. In this week's edition, Nigeria has recently overtaken South Africa as the continent's biggest economy, pushing South Africa to a distant second place. But constant political instability in Africa's most populous nation and threats posed by terrorist groups remain a big challenge. This week on Africa 360, we look at how lingering security concerns could affect Nigeria's new economic status. This as Nigeria prepares to host the upcoming World Economic Forum. All this and more coming up right here on Africa 360. Well, Nigeria has been declared as Africa's new economic leader. The West African giant is now worth an estimated $510 billion US. But with ongoing terrorist attacks and deep-rooted historical divisions, is Nigeria ready to move into the future? eNCA's West Africa correspondent Adure Achumba has more on this.
Africa's new powerhouse. Nigeria already has the continent's largest population. Now it has the biggest economy, overtaking South Africa. Rebasing financial statistics has put the country's gross domestic product at over $500 billion US. That's 60% more than South Africa. The rebase focused on sectors that were previously excluded from GDP calculations. They include retail and the country's world-famous Nollywood film industry. But one of the biggest contributors to the GDP boost is the telecom sector, which did not even exist 20 years ago. So essentially, Nigeria looks good on paper, but there are still many factors anchoring the powerhouse in the past. The issue of a unified nation has plagued the country since independence. The Nigerian Civil War of the 1960s was the horrific apex highlighting divisions in the country. Over 1 million Nigerians died in the conflict that saw Biafra try to secede. 6 decades later, and the threat of division remains. Since 2009, Islamist sect Boko Haram has waged a terrible war against government and education. The group's aim is to establish an Islamic state in the country's north. Roughly translated, Boko Haram means Western education is sinful in the local Hausa language. But the most disturbing part of the group's campaign is the people who fall victim. They're not rich. They're not Westerners. They're by and large not even the army or police. They're ordinary Nigerians who lose their homes, their daughters and sons, and their lives to the insurgency. Nearly 2,000 people have been killed since the group was formed.
We do go to church, but sometimes we fear. Even when we are in church, some people pray. Formally, we pray in the church and close our eyes. But now we cannot be able to close our eyes because we don't know when you close your eye what will happen next.
Rush hour in the Nigerian capital. Technically, it's meant to be the most secure place in the country. Not so on the 14th of April. A bomb ripped through a bus station in Abuja, killing more than 70 people. Just hours later, over 100 schoolgirls were abducted from a boarding school. Those who escaped threw themselves from a moving truck. Those who didn't are likely sex slaves. Government's response has been heavy-handed. Again, civilians have been affected, with the army accused of extrajudicial killings and torture. Far from deterring Boko Haram, the group appears to have been galvanized. What's more, Nigeria is heading for key elections in February of next year, with many expecting violence. Infighting within the governing PDP has weakened government too. President Goodluck Jonathan's supporters in the Niger Delta have threatened to make the country ungovernable if he doesn't remain president. Now, Nigeria is taking a different approach to terrorism. Abuja, having launched appeals to the international community, will now be focusing on human security rather than armed response. That includes wealth distribution and better living conditions in states where insurgency has been breeding.
Based on our understanding of the economic root of terrorism and global best practices in addressing them, we are working with the governors of the 6 northeastern states of Nigeria to design an economic revitalization program targeted toward the states most impacted by terrorism.
Nigeria has taken the lead as a regional power. But that comes at a price. Its neighbors like Chad, Cameroon, and Niger look to Abuja to secure its borders. Unfortunately, Boko Haram has been expanding its area of influence to include those countries. This May, Nigeria will host the African meeting of the World Economic Forum. It's only fitting that Africa's largest economy be at the forefront of international financial policy. But the lack of security and adequate infrastructure means its status will be short-lived. Still, even with all its problems, Nigeria still managed to become the continent's top economy. And with those issues addressed, the country's potential is truly staggering. Aduria Chumba, Lagos.
Many thanks there to Dore for that report. Do stay with us here on Africa 360, because after the break, I'll be joined by a panel of experts to take our conversation on Nigeria further, and that's only on Africa 360.
The number of deaths by Boko Haram has risen by about 3,000 to 4,000 or 5,000 people. That's a large number of people dead. But it hasn't had the dent that it should have on the economy.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, this is Africa 360. Today, we're focusing on the lingering security threat posed by the terrorist groups such as Boko Haram. This is as Nigeria celebrates its new economic status on the continent. Well, joining me right now here in our Johannesburg studios to take our discussion further is Martin Iwe from the Institute for Security Studies. And of course, our regular resident analyst, Kofi Kwaku, who, as you know, is a regular contributor to this program. And also joining us from our Pretoria studios is Dr. Richard Irwanya from the University of Pretoria. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on Africa 360. Richard, let me start with you. Some good signs for Nigeria's economy. It's said that it is surpassed South Africa in terms of size. The numbers that we have before us here is that Nigeria is now rated as the biggest at $510 billion US dollars, and that is 100 billion more than South Africa. Is this justified given the political and security concerns?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think to start with, Nigeria has been a very populous country, and the problem of insecurity did not just start with just a recent pronouncement that its economy has surpassed the South African economy. The political problem, a crisis in Nigeria, dates back to if you like, to the 60s, dates back to the 90s, the 80s, and we experienced this kind of uprising in the country. So it has nothing to do with the recent announcement. We have to understand the problem from a broader political perspective or historical perspective, if you like.
Yeah, fair enough. You can look at the balance sheet and simply make the numbers make sense. But here, Kofi Kwaku, what Dr. Iriwanyo is saying is that we have to consider some of the political, social factors that might skew our understanding about this new status that has been gained by Nigeria. Give us some context here.
This is a very, very disturbing situation with the kind of thing we have, balancing economic, if you want, power, and then if you want terrorist stability. It's something really important. Nigeria has been a very resilient country and a very resilient economy. In fact, since 2002, since the creation of Boko Haram, there've been, I know it's a bit of a difficult thing for me to say, but the number of deaths by Boko Haram has risen by about 3,000 to 5,000 people. That's a large number of people dead. But it hasn't had the dent that it should have on the economy. So it makes Nigeria really solid.
But why doesn't it have a dent on the status? Because here you have 200 girls recently disappeared up north in Borno. We had the bombing of none other than the capital, the first time in 2 years, 79 people killed. We're just talking about something that happened a few weeks ago. Is life cheap in Africa? Is that why we don't?
I totally agree with your outrage, and then the fact that you're expressing it very well. All of us should be outraged, but if you look at it in the greater scheme of things, that emotional impact is not really factored at all in many of the economic analysis, which is probably, perhaps we should have that as a new indicator, but for now, it hasn't been. And if you do want to factor it, it's going to have a minimal effect, almost a sort of an edge or external issue into the economic affairs of Nigeria. Nigeria, by and large, economically is very powerful, and that's now showing.
It's interesting what Kofi Kwaku is saying, and it really echoes the sentiments of President Goodluck Jonathan, who went on record after this Nyanya attack, that is a suburb in Abuja, saying, well, it's just a temporary threat, and he's referring to Boko Haram. Justified or not, Martin?
I beg to differ a little bit with what Kofi is saying. To say that probably without this security threat to Nigeria, Nigeria would have surpassed the South Africa economy way before 2014. So I think that the security conditions of Nigeria are actually slowing the economy because Nigeria does not have the tourists, the number of tourists that South Africa has today. And I think if Nigeria were to have just half of the tourists that South Africa has, I'm sure we would have been talking of 13 billions more than the South African economy, not just what we have now. But to look deep into the security condition, Boko Haram, to some extent, one would say yes, because it's operating mostly from the northeast, which is a small part of Nigeria, far away, bordering Chad and Cameroon. Yeah. It's not the same when we used to have the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta, which was at the heart of the Nigerian economy, heating petroleum infrastructure. That one was more dangerous. And I think if men were to exist today, I don't think Nigeria would have surpassed South Africa.
Some interesting points there, and let me bring it back to you, Dr. Iruanya in Pretoria. The thing is, though, that there's this sharp contrast when you look at the north and the south of the economy, as mentioned here by Martiniwe. On the one hand, we see deep poverty and inequality up north, and we see enclaves in the south of economic activity. This surely must be a driver of continued political instability in Nigeria, particularly when you consider the deficits in investments in things like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Talk to us about that, Dr. Iruanya.
To an extent, I will agree with him, with Kofi's analysis of the situation. But when you look at the problem in Nigeria, you will understand that people tend to say that poverty is responsible for what is going on currently in northeastern region of the country. But we cannot just understand the actual situation of the problem. The actual situation of things in Nigeria, if we keep heaping poverty, keep claiming that a lack of social infrastructures, lack of education, lack of employment, and so on, as the cause of the problem in the northeast region of the country, it goes beyond that. The individuals who are actually engaged in carrying out activities of terrorism in the country are well-motivated individuals. They're well indoctrinated in their religion. So poverty is not actually responsible or a causal factor, although it is an enabling factor. Leaders of Boko Haram, the founders, from Muhammad Ali to Muhammad Yusuf, they were not poor people. So we cannot actually say that socioeconomic condition is facilitated, is the causal factor of the Boko Haram problem in Nigeria. It goes beyond that.
Let's pick that up after the break here on Africa 360, because when we come back, we want to continue our discussion focusing on how the ongoing security challenges facing this West African nation could possibly affect its newly found position as #1 in economic terms in Africa on 360.
Nigeria has not been able to develop the electricity power that it needs, not because it doesn't have the energy, the resources to do so, the power to do so, but it's purely out of corruption.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Africa 360. Our focus today is Nigeria's political and economic situation ahead of the upcoming World Economic Forum on Africa, which is to be held in Abuja in a few weeks' time. We're also reflecting on the country's deep-rooted divisions as we consider some of these questions. So, Martin Iwi, one of the things that we note is that next year is a big election year for Nigeria, and Nigerians will go to the polls. One of the key factors that are concerning some of the political and economic pundits is the fact that supporters of Goodluck Jonathan, of course, some of them in the PDP, which is the governing party, have indicated that especially those who are in Bayelsa State, in the Niger Delta, they're saying that if Goodluck Jonathan is not elected, they are threatening to make Nigeria ungovernable. And remember, that state is, as you mentioned earlier on, one of the key economic hubs. Take us through that.
Yeah, I think this is a serious problem. But again, it's just a threat. I don't believe that because there are several movements there at the Niger Delta region who are actually threatening, and that has been going on for a while now, because the division or the debate about supporting Jonathan and not supporting Jonathan has been going on for a while, because Jonathan has actually received some unfair criticism. I would say he's one of the most criticized Nigerian presidents. You can imagine, for a country that has been ruled for many years by dictators, but we have a democratic leader who has been criticized more than any other leader in the history of the country.
Kofi.
I would agree with him. In fact, I'm very positive. One of the things I keep having in mind is when Nigeria awakes, and Nigeria is the slumbered giant is now awakening. And at the heart of that awakening is obviously some churning. The first one is political churning. People, parties, civil society, people have powers, all of them, the stakeholders, are trying to find a way to get this giant to awake. And you're going to have the criticism. In fact, it's a great thing that Nigeria, especially Jonathan Goodluck, is criticized, and the parties are finding their ways. A lot of them have moved away. They're creating new parties away from the PDP. Former President Obasanjo, very active, is criticized, in fact, Jonathan Goodluck many months ago through a very scathing letter. But what they're trying to do is to find that feat, because they all know that the future of Nigeria is in their own hands. They're never going to destroy the country. This giant will succeed beside the political turmoil it's going through.
So Kofi Kwaku and Martin Iwe say, in spite of these challenges that you've highlighted in terms of the political instability that we point out, that the rebasing of Nigeria's economic status is quite justified. Do you agree?
I think I will agree with the rebasing of the economy. Like Kofi rightly said, that all things being equal, if Nigeria has rebased its economy earlier, it will still have surpassed the South African economy, going by our population and going by the number of foreign investments that have come into the country in recent time. So the Boko Haram issue, and actually it's not happening at the heart of the Nigerian economy. The country is dependent on the oil sector, and this sector has contributed quite immensely to development of the country. But recently, we have also found that the manufacturing sector in the Nigerian economy is also quite expanding. So we don't have to save the amount of tourists that South Africa receives, and if The northern part of the country, of course, will be a good tourist destination. We have the Yankari Games Reserve, and we have other tourist attractions in those areas. So, but the tourism sector has not contributed quite a lot
so then
in terms of Nigeria's GDP.
Let's bring in Kofi here. You know, one of the things is that we're talking here about this potential. This potential is being hampered by some of the political instability, the governance challenges that we're facing. Corruption has also been highlighted. But here's a fundamental factor. If Nigeria is going to get into the manufacturing game, industrialize, the beneficiation game, energy is a requirement. One of the stats that we have offhand is that for 50 million people in South Africa is producing about 45 megawatts of electricity. Nigeria, 10% of that 45. What will it take to provide the capacity for this infrastructure development?
The most important is going to depend on that political will to open up, and there's a lot of now pressure on the Nigerian government to do so. And as you rightly said, so in the next few weeks there'll be a World Economic Forum. This is really a sign off to say we are now starting to trust you that there's something is moving in this place, and that's going to. We may be impatient, but that is going to take place very soon.
Impatient. It's going to take place soon. Martin, you're shaking your head vigorously. And just before you respond, I want to also ask you a question which says, why has there been a lack of political will to get the security infrastructure behind this great potential and secure the northeast, and of course maybe Bayelsa State, River State, other areas like that that are prone to instability?
I think Nigeria has survived the way it is with the current infrastructures. And there are benefactors, there are people benefiting from the current state of affairs. Nigeria has not been able to develop the electricity power that it needs, not because it doesn't have the energy, the resources to do so, the power to do so, but it's purely out of corruption. If you look at Nigeria, the alternative to electricity is so high, and this belongs to the private sectors. The private sector is one of the richest sectors in Nigerian economy, and these people are extremely powerful. Those selling generators, these motor generators that supply electricity alternatively, are some of the richest people in Nigeria. And I think I've been to Nigeria several times. I've met a number of companies that have come to try out electricity to supply, but they've all failed because of the enormous power of the private sector, those who are supplying alternative electricity to the Nigerian population. And I think the change will only come. You're talking about new investors coming in, except these new investors will be more powerful than the current, how should I call them, those who have benefited so much out of the current system. If the new investors are more powerful, then we can see a change. Nigeria have been talking about generating electricity. The debate it goes back almost half a century.
So these are old debates, Richard, in Pretoria. Let's get a final remark from you here. We could go on and talk about the huge potential that Nigeria brings to the table. It's crucial for the African continent. We get that. But do you believe that this is now the tipping point for Nigeria, that we're going to see Nigeria developing?
Yeah, we have always said that the problem of Nigeria is energy generation. And if we can get that right in Nigeria, definitely the development of the country will accelerate, tremendously. And the problem that one of the panelists alluded to is that we've been experiencing corruption, and corruption in public sector is actually what is dragging Nigeria backward. And there have been a lot of foreign investors coming to invest in the Nigerian oil sector, the energy sector, but have not been able to actually realize the Nigerians' aspiration to power generation because of corruption. And the energy sector is privatized, but they have been bought over by also politicians and their cronies, and they are not creating the enabling environment that the foreign investors who have the funding, who have the resources, the technology, to develop this sector to actually work.
Martin Iwi, your final concluding remarks. Is this the tipping point?
I think it could be the tipping point, but again, a lot of things will have to happen for Nigeria to change. A tipping point in the sense that if Nigerians can reunite just on one issue to combat the current security threat, then we could see Nigeria really blossom more than what we are seeing today.
Kofi Kwaku.
There are many what-ifs, but I believe Nigeria will awake powerfully.
Nigeria will awake powerfully. What a powerful place for us to bring this program to an end. I'd like to thank our guests who've joined us and for sharing those key insights here on Africa 360. So do tell us if you think Nigeria's status as Africa's new economic powerhouse will have a positive impact on its citizens, or is it just a case of shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic? You can join the debate by liking our Facebook page, or you can tweet us your views at Africa360_eNCA. You can also send us an email to Africa360@enca.com. So until next time, when we look forward to bringing you Africa like you've never seen it before, do take care. Thank you. Thank you very much.